What if I told you that a 72-year-old woman facing eviction in 48 hours discovered a real estate strategy so powerful that it not only saved her home, but created generational wealth? Susan and Frank Thompson were minutes away from losing everything when David Clark revealed a technique that banks don't want you to know. The transformation you're about to witness will challenge everything you believe about financial recovery. This isn't just another success story. This is proof that age is never a barrier to incredible comebacks. Stay here because what happens next will restore your faith in second chances completely. Susan Thompson stared at the eviction notice with trembling hands. 72 years old, married to Frank for 48 years, and they had exactly 48 hours before the sheriff would arrive to remove them from the home they'd lived in for 3 decades. Their fixed income couldn't cover the mounting medical bills after Frank's heart surgery. The mortgage company had refused every payment plan. Their adult children lived paycheck to paycheck and couldn't help. The local senior services had no emergency housing available. Susan had called every number, visited every office, begged every official. Nothing. The retirement they'd planned for 30 years had become a nightmare they couldn't wake up from. Frank sat silently in his wheelchair, staring out the window at the garden he'd tended for decades. The man who'd worked construction for 40 years, who'd built their dream home with his own hands, was now watching strangers prepare to take it all away. Susan had hidden the eviction notice from him for weeks, hoping for a miracle that never came. The stress had triggered another cardiac episode. The ambulance ride alone cost them their last savings. Tomorrow morning, everything they'd worked for would belong to the bank. Their photos, Frank's tools, Susan's mother's china, all of it boxed up and stored in a facility they couldn't afford. They'd be sleeping in their old sedan, 2 senior citizens with nowhere to go and no one left to turn to. The system had failed them, their government had forgotten them, their community had abandoned them. But sometimes, when hope seems completely lost, the impossible finds a way. Sometimes strategic intervention appears at the exact moment when surrender feels inevitable. Hopeless? Don't give up, because the incredible rescue you're about to witness will change everything. The morning of the eviction, Susan sat on their front porch watching the sheriff's cars pull into the driveway. 47 years, 8 months, and 12 days they'd called this place home. She remembered Frank carrying her across this threshold as newlyweds. She remembered their children taking first steps in the living room. She remembered hosting Christmas dinners, birthday parties, graduation celebrations, all of it ending today. Frank had been hospitalized again overnight. The stress had become too much for his weakened heart. Susan was facing this final humiliation, alone. The neighbors had gathered across the street, some crying, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The Thompsons had been pillars of this community. Frank had helped build half the houses on this block. Susan had organized every charity drive, every community cleanup, every neighborhood watch meeting. Now they were watching her lose everything. The sheriff approached with papers and an apologetic expression. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm sorry. You have 1 hour to collect personal items. The bank representatives will be here shortly to change the locks." Susan nodded, unable to speak. How do you pack a lifetime into boxes in 60 minutes? How do you choose which memories to save when everything holds significance? Inside, she moved through rooms filled with 48 years of marriage. Frank's reading chair, where he'd fallen asleep every night watching the news. The kitchen table where they'd shared thousands of meals. The bedroom where they'd comforted each other through every crisis life had thrown at them. Until now, this crisis was different. This crisis was final. The medical bills covered their dining room table like accusations. The mortgage statements showed months of missed payments. Frank's medications cost more than their monthly Social Security combined. The insurance company had found reasons to deny coverage for everything important. The bank had offered no mercy, no payment plans, no consideration for decades of faithful payments before the medical emergency. Susan called their oldest daughter one last time. "Honey, we're losing the house today. I know you can't help financially. I just wanted you to know we'll be staying in the car until we figure something out. Don't worry about us. We'll manage somehow." The conversation ended with both women crying, powerless against forces too big for families to fight. That's when David Clark knocked on the door. He'd heard about the eviction through a network of real estate professionals who tracked distressed properties. But David wasn't there to profit from their pain. He was there because he understood what financial desperation felt like. 8 years earlier, he'd been facing his own foreclosure after his architecture firm collapsed. He'd learned strategies from Robert Kiyosaki's teachings that most people never discover. Strategies that could save homes even when traditional solutions had failed. Mrs. Thompson, my name is David Clark. I specialize in emergency real estate interventions. I know you're being evicted today, but I need you to understand something important. This situation might not be as hopeless as it appears. I've seen families in worse situations than yours find solutions that seemed impossible. Would you give me 15 minutes to explain something that could change everything? Susan looked at this stranger with skeptical eyes. She'd heard promises before. Every scammer in the county had contacted them with miracle solutions that required upfront fees they didn't have. Every reverse mortgage company had pitched dreams that turned into nightmares. Every attorney had explained why their case was hopeless. Why should this man be different? But something in David's voice was different. He wasn't selling anything. He wasn't asking for money. He was offering information. And when you're about to lose everything, information is the only currency that matters. Panicked? Subscribe right now, because the life-saving method he reveals next has rescued thousands from financial ruin. David Clark sat across from Susan in the living room she was about to lose forever. The sheriff's deputies waited outside while he explained concepts that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. Mrs. Thompson, what I'm about to share with you comes from years of studying Robert Kiyosaki's principles and applying them to emergency situations. Most people think that when you can't make mortgage payments, you lose your house. But that's only true if you don't understand how real estate actually works. He pulled out a legal pad and began drawing diagrams. Your house isn't just a liability. Right now, it's an asset that can solve this entire crisis. But we need to think like investors, not homeowners. Kiyosaki teaches that the poor and middle class buy liabilities they think are assets. But the wealthy buy assets that put money in their pockets. Today, we're going to transform your home from a liability that's bleeding you dry into an asset that saves your future. Susan interrupted, her voice shaking. Mr. Clark, we owe more than the house is worth. The medical bills destroyed our credit. We have no income except Social Security. No bank will help us. We've tried everything. The eviction starts in 30 minutes. David nodded with understanding. Susan, everything you just said is exactly why traditional solutions failed. Banks think like banks, but we're going to think like strategic investors. What if I told you that your age, your situation, even your debt problems could actually become advantages with the right strategy? What if the solution isn't fighting the system, but using the system's own rules to save your home? He continued, drawing. Here's what most people don't understand about foreclosure. The bank doesn't want your house, they want their money. Houses are liabilities for banks too. They have to maintain them, pay taxes, deal with vandalism, hire real estate agents, pay commissions. Every month your house sits empty, costs them thousands. But what if we could solve their problem while solving yours? Susan leaned forward, desperate for hope. What are you talking about? Subject to acquisition with leaseback agreement, David explained. I'm going to buy your house subject to the existing mortgage. That means I take over the payments without getting a new loan. The bank gets their money, you keep your home, and we structure it so you build equity while living here. But here's the key. We're going to use the additional value I can create through strategic improvements to generate income that covers all your expenses. Susan's skepticism returned. That sounds too good to be true. Why would you help us? What's in it for you? David smiled. That's the beauty of Kiyosaki's principles. When you structure deals correctly, everyone wins. I get a property with built-in equity and a reliable tenant who cares for the home like owners. You get to stay in your house, rebuild your credit, and participate in the future appreciation. The bank gets consistent payments without foreclosure. Costs, it's not charity, it's strategic investment. He showed her the numbers. Your mortgage payment is $1,800. With taxes and insurance, total housing cost is $2,200 monthly, but this house could rent for $2,800 in today's market. That gives us $600 monthly surplus. Half goes to building your equity position, half covers your medical payment plans. Susan stared at the numbers. But we can't qualify for anything. Our credit is destroyed. That's why this strategy works, David explained. I'm using my credit and resources to acquire the property subject to. You're not applying for loans. We're creating a path for you to eventually own this house free and clear through lease purchase credits. Every month you stay, you build equity. In 5 years, when Frank's health improves and your credit rebuilds, you can refinance and own it outright. The sheriff knocked on the door. 10 minutes, Mrs. Thompson. David stood up. Susan, I need an answer right now. I have title company representatives waiting. We can stop this eviction today, but only if you trust me enough to sign papers that will seem impossible. Everything I've explained can be legally executed within the next 2 hours, but you have to decide now. Susan thought about Frank in the hospital, probably watching the clock and waiting for news that they'd lost everything. She thought about sleeping in their car, about the humiliation of asking churches for shelter, about dying homeless after a lifetime of hard work and honest living. Then she thought about this stranger who'd appeared at their darkest moment, with knowledge that could change everything. What do you need me to sign? David pulled out documents his attorney had prepared. Purchase agreement, leaseback contract, and equity participation agreement. These papers will transfer ownership to me, subject to existing financing. Guarantee your right to remain in the home and establish your path to future ownership. In 2 hours, this will be my house legally, but it will still be your home practically, and in 5 years, it can be your house again permanently. Susan read through documents that represented either salvation or the biggest mistake of her life. The legal language was complex, but David's explanations made sense. More importantly, this was the only option between her and homelessness. Sometimes hope requires courage to trust in solutions that seem impossible. She signed her name with trembling hands. David immediately called his title company. Execute the Thompson emergency acquisition. Yes, full cash purchase subject to existing liens. Transfer all documents to courthouse immediately. We need to stop an eviction in progress. He hung up and looked at Susan. The sheriff can't evict you from a house that just sold. We have legal right to postpone while ownership transfers. You're safe. Susan collapsed into Frank's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Mind absolutely blown. Destroy that like button and stay locked in because the incredible transformation is about to unfold. Within 2 hours, the impossible had become reality. David Clark's attorney arrived with ownership documents that legally transferred the Thompson house from pending foreclosure to sold property. The sheriff's department received notification that the eviction was invalid due to change of ownership. The bank received payment instructions that satisfied their foreclosure action, and Susan Thompson received keys to the home she thought she'd lost forever. But the transformation was just beginning. David immediately implemented phase 2 of his strategy. He hired contractors to make strategic improvements that would increase the property value while creating additional income streams. The basement became a separate apartment that could rent for $800 monthly. The large backyard was subdivided to build a tiny home that generated another $600 in rental income. The garage was converted into a workshop space that Frank could use for part-time woodworking projects. The numbers were staggering. The property that had been draining $2,000 monthly from the Thompsons was now generating $1,400 monthly in positive cash flow. The mortgage payment that had seemed impossible was now easily covered with surplus for medical bills and living expenses. But the most incredible transformation was emotional. When Susan called Frank at the hospital to explain what had happened, he thought the medication was causing hallucinations. Susan, are you telling me that a stranger bought our house, but we still live here? And now we're making money from the property instead of losing money? And in 5 years we can own it free and clear. That's impossible. Susan looked around the living room where she'd signed papers that morning, believing she'd never see it again. Frank, I thought it was impossible too. But sometimes impossible things happen when the right knowledge meets the right moment. David didn't just save our house, he showed us how to think about money completely differently. The community response was equally incredible. Neighbors who'd watched the eviction proceedings in horror were now witnessing something they'd never seen before. A family facing homelessness had not only kept their home but transformed it into an income-producing asset. Word spread through senior networks about strategies that could help others facing similar crises. David spent hours educating Susan about Robert Kiyosaki's principles that had made this rescue possible. The key insight is understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. Most people think their home is an asset because it has value. But if it takes money out of your pocket every month, it's actually a liability. We converted your liability into an asset by making it put money in your pocket instead of taking money out. The medical bills that had triggered the entire crisis were now manageable. The steady income from the property improvements covered payment plans that preserved Frank's care while rebuilding their credit. The stress that had exacerbated Frank's heart condition was replaced by hope that accelerated his recovery. 3. Months later, Frank was back home working in his new workshop, building custom furniture for neighbors who'd heard about his craftsmanship. The physical activity was helping his cardiac rehabilitation while generating additional income that exceeded their previous financial stress levels. 6 months later, Susan had become an advocate for seniors facing financial crises. She worked with David to identify other elderly couples whose situations could benefit from similar strategies. Her testimony helped convince banks to consider subject-to solutions before pursuing costly foreclosures. 1 year later, the Thompson property was worth $30,000 more than when David purchased it. Susan's equity participation agreement meant she shared in that appreciation. The additional value, combined with rental income credits, was building toward their goal of complete ownership within 5 years. But the most profound change was psychological. Susan and Frank had discovered that age didn't disqualify them from creating wealth. Their crisis had taught them principles they'd never learned in 48 years of traditional employment. They were thinking like investors instead of victims. The eviction notice still hung framed in their kitchen as a reminder of how quickly life can change. But next to it hung David's business card and a photo of the property improvements that had transformed their nightmare into a dream. They'd learned that knowledge applied at the right moment could overcome seemingly impossible circumstances. Yet the most powerful, life-defining lesson that will determine whether you survive your own crisis is what I'm about to reveal. The lesson Susan and Frank learned changed everything. Your current financial position is not your permanent financial future. Knowledge applied with strategic timing can overcome any crisis, at any age, in any situation. Next week, I'm sharing another incredible rescue story where a single mother facing bankruptcy discovered a real estate strategy that not only saved her family but created multiple income streams that secured their future permanently. If you're facing your own financial crisis right now, please subscribe to this channel immediately. Hit that subscription button and activate notifications because these rescue strategies could save your family from financial destruction. Give this video a massive thumbs up to help others discover these life-saving solutions. Share this story with anyone you know who's struggling financially, because hope shared is hope multiplied. The comments section is filled with families who've applied these principles to overcome their own impossible situations. Read their stories, share your own situation, and connect with others who understand that strategic knowledge can defeat any financial crisis. Support this channel's mission to rescue families from financial ruin by engaging with every video, because each view helps us reach another family that needs these solutions. Your current crisis is not your final destination. Every financial emergency contains the seeds of future prosperity when you understand how money really works. The same principles that saved Susan and Frank's home can save yours. The same strategies that transform their liability into an asset can transform your situation. Age is not a disqualification. Credit scores are not permanent. Debt is not destiny. Whether you're facing foreclosure, eviction, bankruptcy, or any other financial emergency, remember that strategic intervention is always possible. Solutions exist that most people never discover, because they're not taught in schools or discussed in traditional financial planning. But they're real, they're legal, and they're available to anyone willing to think differently about money and real estate. Don't give up on your family's future. Don't accept defeat as permanent. Don't believe that your situation is too complicated for rescue. Every crisis contains opportunity for those who understand how to find it. Every problem has a solution for those who learn the right principles. Remember, your real estate empire starts with your next decision. Make it count.